On August 11th, 2026, on a quiet testing airstrip in Uttar Pradesh, something took off that most people around the world haven't heard about yet, but probably should. A small Indian startup just flew a weapon that, until recently, only a handful of countries on Earth could build, and they did it without buying a single critical part from anyone else. Let's start with what actually happened. The system is called the Divyastra Mk3, and it's what's known as a loitering munition. If that term is new to you, think of it this way. Unlike a missile that flies in a straight line to a preset target, a loitering munition takes off, circles or loiters over an area, uses onboard sensors and cameras to search for a target, and then dives down to destroy it on impact. That's why they're sometimes nicknamed kamikaze drones or suicide drones. The aircraft itself is the weapon. Other countries have built similar systems before, most famously Israel's Harap and the American Switchblade. But what makes the Divyastra Mark III different is what's inside it. This particular drone is jet-powered, which is a serious technical step up from the smaller propeller-driven loitering munitions most countries currently use. Jet propulsion means higher speed, longer range, and the ability to reach targets faster before they can react or move. And the company behind it says that jet engine, along with essentially every other critical component, was designed and built entirely inside India. The company responsible is called Kawa UAV, operating under the brand name Hoverit, and it's based in Lucknow. This isn't a massive state-run defense giant with decades of institutional history. It's a relatively young private defense startup working out of the Uttar Pradesh Defense Industrial Corridor, a zone the Indian government set up specifically to encourage private companies to build military hardware domestically. And here's the detail that really stands out. According to the company, they went from the very start of this program to a successful maiden flight in about 1 calendar year. For context, developing a new jet engine alone, let alone integrating it into a complete flying weapons platform, typically takes major defense contractors several years, sometimes over a decade. So how does a small private startup pull that off in 12 months? Part of the answer lies in India's broader defense strategy over the past several years. The government has been pushing what it calls Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India, specifically in the defense sector. Instead of relying primarily on large public sector companies to build weapons, India has increasingly opened the door for private startups to compete, innovate, and move faster than traditional procurement processes normally allow. Kawa UAV appears to be one of the clearest results of that shift. The test itself is also worth walking through because it tells you something about how these systems are meant to be deployed in the real world. The Divyastra Mark III wasn't launched from a runway like a traditional aircraft. Instead, the entire integrated system was mounted on a moving vehicle. Once that vehicle reached the necessary speed, the loitering munition launched directly from the platform and transitioned into flight. That mobile launch method matters strategically. It means the weapon doesn't need a fixed airbase or a long runway to get airborne, making it far more flexible and harder for an adversary to predict or preemptively target. It's also worth clarifying one thing because the name can cause some confusion. This Divyastra Mark III is completely separate from something called Mission Divyastra, which is a different Indian defense program tied to the Agni 5 missile and its MIRV re-entry technology. That's a long-range ballistic missile system, not a drone. The naming overlap is coincidental. The Divyastra Mark III we're talking about today is purely this jet-powered loitering munition from Kawa UAV. Now, for current testing, this system has been integrated onto UAV platforms built by New Space Research and Technologies, a Bengaluru-based defense company that's been developing its own long-range drone systems as well. That's an important detail because it shows this isn't an isolated one-off project. It's part of a broader, connected ecosystem of Indian private defense companies that are increasingly working together, or at least building compatible technology, to expand the country's unmanned strike capabilities. India's Defense Minister, Rajnath Singh, publicly praised the development, tying it to a related program, trials of a separate system called the ULPG-MV3, a precision-guided munition tested in both air-to-ground and air-to-air roles, developed through DRDO along with public sector and private industry partners. Together, these announcements paint a picture of a country accelerating multiple tracks of indigenous weapons development at once rather than betting everything on a single flagship program. So, why does any of this matter beyond India's own borders? A few reasons worth sitting with. First, loitering munitions have become one of the defining weapons categories of modern warfare over the past several years. Cheap relative to traditional missiles, hard to intercept, and increasingly central to how militaries fight, as seen in multiple recent conflicts around the world. A country that can design and manufacture its own version of this technology without depending on imported engines or foreign critical components gains a level of strategic independence that very few nations currently have. Second, India sits in a genuinely complex neighborhood with ongoing tensions along multiple borders. Building this capability domestically, quickly, and through private industry rather than solely through state-run defense giants signals a shift in how India intends to modernize its military going forward. There's also a broader story here about where military innovation is coming from these days. For a long time, cutting-edge defense technology was almost exclusively the domain of a small number of massive government-linked contractors. What we're seeing with Kawa UAV is part of a global pattern. Small, agile private startups increasingly punching above their weight in defense technology, sometimes moving faster than the traditional giants because they aren't weighed down by the same bureaucratic processes. Of course, a single successful test flight is not the same as a fully operational, combat-ready weapon system fielded across the armed forces. There's a long road between a maiden flight and full deployment. Further testing, evaluation, potential government contracts, and production at scale all still need to happen. But the fact that this milestone was reached at all by a young private company in roughly a year with zero imported critical components is the part that's turning heads in defense circles. Whether the Divyastra Mk3 becomes a widely deployed system or just one step in a much longer development story is still unwritten. But what's already clear is this. The barrier to entry for building advanced, independent military drone technology just got a lot lower. And India just showed the world it's willing to cross that line on its own terms. What do you think? Is this the kind of innovation that reshapes regional defense balances? Or is it still too early to tell? Let us know in the comments.